5 years ago, I played Half-Life 2 for the first time. I was 14 years old, I had heard of the game very distantly, so I knew about the series, but I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't even think about touching the game until my friend Owen convinced me to. It was during a free weekend in March, and I didn't beat it in time. I actually didn't even get halfway through it. If I hadn't liked the game, I would have gone about my year and I wouldn't have thought anything of it. But 3 months later, the Steam summer sale hit, I handed my mom $5 and I bought the game for real. Now, to be entirely honest, my way of playing the Half-Life franchise was not exactly in order. I played Half-Life 2 in its episodes, then Half-Life Alyx, and then I played Black Mesa, Crowbar Collective's fan remake of the first game, which in my opinion is pretty good. I never, however, in that time played the original game. But you're probably wondering, why am I telling you all this? The Half-Life series has its issues, but there's no denying that it's legendary in video game history. I've wanted to take a crack at it for a while, but I'm by no means good at analyzing medias, and this was a pretty big goal for me, so I figured if I was going to do it at all, I would do it my way. In this short series, I'm going to take a look at the Half-Life franchise from my perspective, and I figured if I was going to start anywhere, I might as well start at the game that I never even played. Half-Life as a video game set precedents for the industry in a very special way. 1998 itself was actually a really good year for video games, with titles like Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil 2 releasing, but Half-Life was the best for the FPS genre. At the time, most first-person shooters were actually thought to be clones of Doom or Quake, but despite using the Quake engine, Half-Life was actually different. It had systems built solely for the player, like a physics engine which was built with excessive player interaction in mind, as well as an in-depth story that's entirely at the player's discretion to pay attention to. Effort like that made a world for the player to get lost in. Even if you choose to ignore the main plot, the game is still very, very playable. In fact, you could play Half-Life from start to finish without paying a lick of attention to what's happening around you, and you would still find your way to the end of the game. The level design is constructed in such a way that it encourages the player's natural curiosity. Oftentimes when you see a spot and think, something is probably over there, then something is probably over there. The placement of things like ammo and health packs being in positions that make sense to be in gives the player a very reinforced feeling of having a basic understanding of their environment. The ability to locate small supply areas, as well as the act of exploring unorthodox locations for supplies, also become very rewarding due to the game's health system, but more on that later. The general level design simply does margins for the immersiveness of the game as a whole. The ability to play at a consistent pace without being interrupted by a confusing level encourages the player to continue playing, because the pacing of the game is very concrete if you play normally. On top of good level design, Half-Life has one of my favorite storylines overall. The plot, while somewhat basic in theory, is very well written. While everybody is entitled to their own opinion, I do believe that at the end of the day, one of the things that makes Half-Life's plot so great is how easy to enjoy it is. Especially today, I feel like that matters more, with many franchises struggling with the oversaturation of their world building. At the end of the day, Half-Life is a very simple premise, just with very complex details. As the game opens up, you're placed inside the opening sequence, which gives you a really good rundown of where the game is about to take you. You're placed inside of a tram where you can hear the morning intercom telling you minute details like the weather and temperatures, and outside the tram you can see the inner workings and failures of the facility. There's waste spills, people locked outside doors, and people just doing their jobs, and all that has nothing to do with you. The tram ride introduces you to the game's setting, and it sets a precedent for the immersion that the rest of the game has. That's why the tram ride is well regarded in general, because it really is just an introduction, and from what I understand, the way it was done was relatively unheard of at the time. Throughout the rest of the opening sequence, especially in the latter half, when you're given the opportunity to interact rather than observe, you're given so many options to immerse yourself in the world presented before you. Little details like blowing up somebody's soup or tampering with the computers are available to the player who sticks their nose where it shouldn't be. Today, those kinds of Easter eggs are a bit more commonplace, but back then it was considerably more special for them to be there. A lot of the interactability gives chances to learn more about yourself and what's going on, which is one of the reasons it feels so special to me. Anyone can walk straight to the suit and then down to the test chamber, but if you're curious and look one scientist in the eye, he will have something to say. This level of interaction is a medium that's generally kept up, but like in a different way. As the game progresses into levels that you're meant to pass through rather than stay inside of, the interaction becomes more repeatable and utilitarian. It takes the place of crates that you're meant to break or climb atop of, or even the built-in solutions to puzzles throughout the levels. Most commonly, I believe it lies in extraneous puzzles that typically result in ammo or health, but still require you to go out of your way to get more out of your surroundings than just using it as a passageway. Past the tram ride, the game doesn't hold many moments where you're forced to take the backseat cutscene style. You can tell it's intentional because in the opening itself, they give you the part where you explore. It's because you're meant to feel like you're the one making the decisions in the moments. Even in the times where you are forced to wait out some sequence of dialogue or actions, it's never really a true cutscene, and that holds true for what I'd say isn't just the rest of the series, but most Source Engine titles. Valve follows a similar trend, which is the silent protagonist, which is meant simply to immerse yourself in the character that you play by making it feel like it's really you, which ends up helping a lot in forgetting that you're playing as somebody else. Now, I don't want this video to be entirely analyzing and glazing the production and the details of the game itself. I would also like to analyze and glaze the story as well. And as for the story, you play as a theoretical physicist named Gordon Freeman, and you're late for work. Aside from being late, a number of things are going wrong that are very outside of your control. There was a system crash not but 10 minutes before you arrived, and nobody really knows where the sample for your supposed test came from, and they're boosting the machine in the chamber past its normal limits, to the point where equipment is exploding before your very eyes. One of the scientists who manages that issue says that the equipment basically
wasn't meant to do this in the first place.
There's reasons that things are falling apart the way that they are, too. The aforementioned sample is both the purest and possibly most unstable sample they've seen yet. To take the risk and get the most out of their experiment, the scientists are pulling very, very risky moves, even quote-unquote deviating from standard analysis procedure. But the possibility of any kind of disaster is highly unlikely. Now, you might be asking where you even work, because what the hell am I even talking about? And to put it simply, a very secretive science facility. From what you gather in the tram ride, you see things like missiles and radioactive goo, which Lockheed Martin might have, but probably not your average startup. The game really implies throughout the opening that yes, you work at a science facility, but one with heavy, heavy military ties. Once you're in the test chamber, which to be allowed inside you need to grab your HEV suit, you're walked through turning on the anti-mass spectrometer, which I don't think I need to point out. The test you're taking part in is effectively your job. That is to wear a protective suit and do shit that would kill the lab coats if they did it themselves. A scientist mentions a small discrepancy in the readings but brushes it off because it's within acceptable parameters. And as the machine finally warms up, the sample you've heard so much about finally arrives. It's an orange crystal mounted atop a cart that you're meant to push, putting the action of inserting the sample into the machine solely on the player. And the moment you do, everything goes so wrong. The scientists attempt to, but cannot shut it off. They're hit by a stray beam, and you can only assume they died before you get teleported to a place that is oh so clearly not Earth. Once the screen goes black, you come to in the test chamber left in complete ruins, and alarms blare overhead, electrical arcs are flying from the once operational machine, and the blast door you just came through is destroyed with a scientist you just spoke with lying inside. Deep within the confines of the Black Mesa facility, a resonance cascade has occurred. Now, this is an event that a scientist alludes to earlier in the opening.
Although I will admit that the possibility of a resonance cascade scenario is extremely unlikely.
Now, I can't tell you what a resonance cascade exactly is, but I can tell you what it does. And basically, when you insert that sample, the crystal, into the anti-mass spectrometer, it caused the machine to create a rift in space-time. Basically a wormhole, a portal. Assuming you know what a portal does, two locations are now connected. And from that, you can probably guess where the start of the plot is going, which is that beings from another planet, possibly dimension, are now finding their way to Earth. In specific, the confines of the Black Mesa facility where the resonance cascade happened. The first basic enemies the game introduces you to are the zombies and the head crabs. As the player's left to figure out as they reverse engineer their way out of the facility, all the zombies are the player's former coworkers that they took that entire hour to get to know, turned against them via the chicken-looking creature on their heads. I think it's an interesting take on zombies, a bit similar to the effect of the Metroid larva just by look alone, but they attach to the head of whatever they can get their grabbers on, and they just take control. These two enemies kind of claim their stake in the Half-Life series at the start and never leave. They are extremely common enemies, and especially at the start of every game in the franchise. The head crab has become so iconic within the series that it's effectively used as one of the series' mascots, to a similar degree of the crowbar or the lambda symbol. The crowbar itself is also one of, if not the mascot of the series. It's the first weapon they give you in the first and second games. It attacks fast and does decent damage, but you have to get really close to your enemy to use it. They followed up quickly with the pistol, which serves its purpose in early game, but it gets phased out relatively quickly. It also has a secondary fire that fires much faster, but alongside bleeding ammo, it gives a major debuff to the gun's accuracy. You can either find the pistol on the ground from natural causes, or you can crowbar a security guard in the back of the head. But you're practically guaranteed to get a pistol within the first 10 minutes of the Resonance Cascade, no matter what. I think being able to kill your allies is very interesting. It isn't something you can do in future games, let alone many games in general, but you can do it very freely in the first one. It was such a notable detail in the game that mods like Scientist Slaughterhouse were made, which is literally just a sandbox for killing scientists. On the other hand, you're given the option to speak with or save a lot of the Black Mesa employees you meet.
With my brains and your brawn, we'll make an excellent team.
And many of them offer to open doors to supplies if you do, and if you team up with the guards, they'll actually escort you a certain distance before you eventually lose them or they die along the way. You know, not everyone has an HEV suit, but it is nice to get the extra gun. You also get your hands on the shotgun relatively quickly, either from exploring or finding it on a dead body, but it offers a good, high damage alternative to the pistol. You can even right click and shoot 2 shells at once. I would say it's a drawback that it bleeds ammo, but you usually have shotgun shells to spare, like all the time. The only real downside is that it just takes forever to shoot. Even though I never really found myself using the secondary fire in the first game, but only really the primary. I never felt like I was killing anything fast enough when I right-clicked. And if you don't find grenades after the Resonance Cascade, you're sure to find some at least in the next chapter. They're honestly exactly as they sound, you know, they do considerable damage to the point where it'll kill anything you toss it at this point in the game, but it has one major drawback in that you've got to be smart where and when you toss it, especially because it feels incredibly slow in the air. I really never found myself using grenades in combat, but only really like in the tentacle puzzle and also for blowing up a lot of crates at once. They just never felt practical because it wouldn't kill anything that fast, and it also never really worked, but that might just be a me problem. And, you know, all this stuff about weapons and ammo pools and resource management ultimately come down to not dying. The culmination of your survival is based around your health, your ammo, and your suit charge. Your health pool and your suit charge pool are separate. And more often than not, you're not going to have more than 30% suit charge unless you're about to get into a really, really big fight. The values of your health and suit as well as your ammo don't reset as you go between levels, as levels are meant to seamlessly intertwine throughout the game. If you get out of one fight with 1 health, you're entering the next with the same problem unless you find a health pack. I don't think it's hard to manage ammo and health unless you make bad decisions, especially if you explore a bit. Even if you don't explore, chances are you'll come across supply caches from accidentally checking the wrong place when trying to find your way forward. This constant management of your health throughout the game and never having it really be at 100 fabricates this constant tension, especially on harder difficulties. I myself had an awful time in the latter half of the game because I was always leaving fights, bleeding from the throat, and entering the next in the exact same state only to find a health pack at the last second. The next enemy they introduce to you after the Resonance Cascade is the Hound Eye. They don't come back for second features in any more of the Half-Life games, so you only see them in this one. They serve a similar purpose as headcrabs, as being more of a nuisance than anything, but being kinda problematic in swarms. They imply that they damage you through sonic blasts, especially with the hole on their face and the high frequency sounds, but they aren't too hard to kill, lying somewhere between the headcrabs and zombies health-wise. The barnacle enemy soon follows suit as well, which unlike the Hound Eye is in every single Half-Life game that's been made. It's not necessarily an enemy as much as it is an environmental hazard generally used as parts of pathing puzzles for the player. It's a creature that attaches to the roof and sticks down its tongue like a rope, and it sucks you up into it to eat you. You can easily kill it with a few shots from the basic pistol, but honestly it's just a waste of ammo if you can't find your way around it. You also encounter the bull squid as well, which is the first tanky enemy you really run into. It's a very defensive animal that can survive, if not thrive, in areas very dangerous to humans, like areas of toxic waste or sewage, and it has a wide range of attacks, coming from spitting acid at range to biting and tail whipping you up close. They viciously attack headcrabs, which imply an ecosystem where they come from, but more importantly they are defensive rather than offensive compared to headcrabs. They are, in my opinion, the toughest enemy the game throws at you at this point. However, headcrabs still take the crown for being the most annoying. Other environmental hazards they opt to throw your way are the parts of the Black Mesa facility you don't see in the opening. More often than not, in the first third of the game, you're stuck in a destroyed portion of your workplace. Things like electrical hazards or even broken catwalks force you to platform your way to the next destination. Better yet, sometimes they opt to throw defense turrets at you, which are implied to be built in as point defense for the facility itself. Now, what I consider to be the most important enemy they throw at you in the first part of the game is the Vortigaunt, and they're the first enemy from the world that the Resonance Cascade connected you to that isn't animalistic. They stand upright and appear to be much more cohesive, and they attack by tossing beams of energy in your direction and offer more of a combat challenge because they can run and change positions unlike any other enemy you've seen up to this point, which focus mainly on what is their implied behaviors as an animal. Vortigaunts have less health than the zombies, but they deal the most damage of any enemy you've seen yet at range, but with a charge up. You typically encounter them being teleported in rather than nesting like many of the other aliens at the Black Mesa facility, which implies they're operating with a more militaristic intent than what you've seen up until now. Speaking of the military, fantastic news, they're on their way to save you. You learn this through a security guard.
Hey, what the hell are you doing down here? Get topside! I hear troops are coming in to save us.
Which gives you your first goal that isn't just surviving, which is to get topside and get rescued by the military. This starts your next adventure of climbing the Black Mesa facility's layers until you can reach the surface. This ends up posing a number of challenges, considering the facility is in utter shambles, and there's only 2 working elevators that take you between shit, fart, and fuck all, so more often than not you'll be climbing through elevator shafts and vents to get where you need to go. It isn't long before things begin to change though. You start to see trip mines and turrets obviously not there by the intent of the Black Mesa facility, and this implies that the military is actually already here, and truly to get to the surface you're going to have to make your way through their defenses too, because it's demonstrated very clearly that their defenses will kill anything that crosses their paths. It doesn't take long, however, for the player to realize that that is intentional. For whatever reason, the military inside the facility isn't saving scientists. They're shooting anything that moves, including you, so you have another enemy on your hands. The soldiers, also known as HECU units, offer, in my opinion, the most militaristic enemy you fight against. They rapidly move between positions of cover and push you out from behind your own with grenades. Since they're the only human enemy you really face, they have certain behaviors that impressed me while I was playing the game to get footage. The first being that they actually make callouts depending on their situation, but they also react to whatever's happening to them. The same way that they flush you out with grenades, you can flush them out as well. And if you do a significant amount of damage to them, they'll often try to limp to safety while calling for a medic, which I thought was pretty cool. They've got fully automatic weapons, which you do steal, and they take a fair amount of damage before dying, considering the fact that they're wearing body armor. They take your fighting strategies from before and flip them upside down, because now you have to be constantly on the move to deal with them. The best tool that you have at your disposal when dealing with HECU units is your speed, because if you stay in one spot, you will be flushed out and killed. It's not all bad, however, because you get the SMG that the military carries deep into Black Mesa as well. It shares the exact same ammo pool as the pistol, which unfortunately makes the pistol relatively redundant unless you want to conserve ammo. The SMG does slightly less damage than the pistol, and it's slightly less accurate too, but it offers the benefit of dishing out consistent damage considering the fact that it is fully automatic. Its time to kill is considerably faster than the pistol's is, even if you're getting less damage per shot. The SMG also offers a secondary fire, but unlike the shotgun, it does not take from the same ammo pool as the gun itself, but rather a secondary ammo pool for grenades. Yes, that's right, if you have the ammo for it, you can shoot impact grenades from the SMG, and it will decimate everything you faced until this point, because it has the exact same damage and splash as the base grenade. The major benefit to the SMG grenade as compared to the normal one though is that it explodes where it hits and it moves so much faster. It's a separate ammo pool from the normal grenade, however, and ammo for the SMG grenades are incredibly scarce, so you have to be very careful about when and where you use it. Now, however, with stolen weapons and your HEV suit, you make your way through military outposts in the backrooms of the Black Mesa facility. You have to fight past a few rooms of soldiers, inflicting a surprising amount of casualties to the military, more than a theoretical physicist should, and you finally reach the surface that you've aimed for. And at this point, if you haven't put 2 and 2 together, the military was never actually here to save Black Mesa. And what you see on the surface, it confirms that. They aren't just counteracting the alien invasion, they're invading Black Mesa themselves. Mortars, helicopters, everything you could imagine them hitting you with, they're 100% hitting you with it. The overwhelming force of the military on the surface forces you back underground and into the vents of Black Mesa, where a scientist gives you very, very crucial information.
Well, so much for the government. Their idea of containment is to kill everyone associated with the project. Now look, if anyone can get this, it has to be at the science team at the Lambda complex at the opposite end of the base.
Your goal is no longer to be saved by the military, but rather to help save Black Mesa yourself. And to do that, you need to reach the scientists who are holed up in the Lambda complex on the other side of the facility. And the only way to get there is first through the missile silos and then a bunch of old decommissioned rail lines deep within the Black Mesa complex. But it isn't that simple as you could have guessed. You hear it before you see it, but within the silos you intend to pass through is this. It's the first quote-unquote boss you encounter in Half-Life. It's big, it's dangerous, and you're requested by a dying scientist to activate the rocket engine above it and kill it before it gets any larger. A security guard will inform you that it reacts to sound rather than sight, which another security guard will go and take the liberty to actually demonstrate that for you. Your biggest tool in this segment are actually grenades, because they sure as hell make sound when they explode, and you can mostly avoid the tentacles as you navigate the side rooms of the silo, but to reach other parts, you're required to distract the tentacles as you pass across the catwalks. That's where the effectiveness of the grenades in this boss fight comes in handy, because if anything, it's more of a navigation puzzle than it is a boss fight. You can temporarily stun the tentacles by damaging them enough where they'll return to the hole in the floor, but they will come back relatively quickly. So you can really just consider that a waste of ammo, if anything. And when you return power, fuel, and oxygen to the test engine, you make your way back to the silo and completely torch that shit by activating the test engine. This opens up the path below dug by the tentacles themselves, which leads to materials transport, the opening to the rail lines that you need to access. On your way down through the tunnel that the tentacles dug, however, you find the revolver, which, what can I say, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a high damage, high accuracy hit scan gun, but with maybe the scarcest ammo pool of any of the normal weapons. I never found myself using it unless I was extremely pressed for ammo, even though it is one of my favorite weapons in the entire series, and even then I was somehow still finding myself running out of shots. Even though the ammo is incredibly scarce though, it destroys whatever you shoot, especially if you hit a headshot. It's an extremely satisfying and extremely rewarding gun to use, but it is one you need to be careful with if you intend to use it often. Up until this point, as I've replayed the game for footage, I kind of forgot how evil Valve was when they designed certain aspects of this game. The upcoming chapter that you're faced with is on a rail, which is its own thing, but it's immediately prefaced with another environmental boss fight. Yes, immediately after you finish one, they hit you with another. The Gargantua fight itself isn't objectively different than the tentacles, other than your main enemy in this area are HEC units rather than alien creatures, and the Gargantua can see you and attack you directly, but it's typically out of your way as you do the puzzle. The only exception is towards the end when you lead it to the main reactors before turning on the power to the rail system back on. This effectively vaporizes the creature, which gives you the room to now travel towards the Lambda complex through the abandoned rail systems. As you make your way to the rail systems, a guard stops you and tells you about a plan to send a satellite into orbit that the military cancelled. First and foremost, this is a priority before you find your way to the Lambda complex, because they need that satellite if they're going to make any progress. It just so happens, however, that it is on the way. The ensuing chapter, On a Rail, is a pretty controversial chapter within the community. I don't personally hate it, but it does frustrate me. One of the reasons many dislike the chapter is because it's like a slug in the game, and it's like a maze. Once you know what to do with the chapter, it's a breeze, but being trapped on a slow cart in concrete hallways can be rather frustrating. And not to mention, of any of the chapters I played, I felt the most strapped for health in this one, constantly getting high health and suit charge, then losing it all in a relatively unfair fight with soldiers. But that does speak to the plot importance of the chapter as a whole. The military does know you're taking these tunnels, and they're setting up traps for you. They make it clear that they're after you specifically, leaving many discouraging and misspelled graffitis along the tracks. They're even going so far as to set up missile turrets to blow up your train before you can go any further. I think this is when they throw a rocket at me. However, they're stupid and they don't shoot you if you just hide. They also give you at least one explosive device, but I forgot about the other, so I'm just going to bring it up now if anything. Around this point in the game, they give you the satchel, which is just a remote bomb, and they also give you the trip mines. I don't even need to say anything good about the trip mines. They flat out suck, and they only have one purpose in my opinion, which is to use them as stepping stones to bypass certain parts of the game. Objectively, yes, they have a purpose and they can be useful if you play like that, but Half-Life is simply such a fast-paced game, they don't really encourage a playstyle where you can hole up in a corner and wait for someone to walk into your trip mines. The satchels I actually love. They immediately put you into a small puzzle that you need to solve with the satchels themselves, and they're just significantly better than the grenades and the trip mines. Generally speaking, it's because you can detonate them on will, but they actually move pretty quick when you toss them as well. Towards the end of the chapter of Morrill, you get offered two very important pieces of exposition from soldiers before continuing on.
Why didn't you sign on to this shit? Monsters sure, but civilians rewarded this operation anyway.
So, who is this guy, Freeman? They say he was at Ground Zero. Science team? You think he was responsible? Sabotage, maybe? Yeah, maybe. All I know for sure is he's been killing my buddies. Oh yeah, he'll pay. He will definitely pay.
I think these segments of dialogue are very important to note when thinking about the overarching plot of what's really happened. The HECU units you fight throughout the game are the same as the scientists you fight with. They're people, but they were just dealt a really dirty hand because it's their job, the same way it was yours to put the crystal in the machine. You didn't know it would cause a resonance cascade, the same way the soldiers imply they didn't know they'd be shooting scientists, just that they'd be shooting monsters. However, that statement raises another question, which we'll delve deeper into at a later date, but only pose for now. How did the soldiers know there would be monsters at Black Mesa? Shortly after that dialogue, and probably killing the soldiers who spoke, you launch the rocket you were instructed to at the start of Morrill. You backtrack into the tunnels and then find a significantly faster but weirder looking train, only to find that that rail line was trapped, so you've been ambushed, but this starts the chapter Apprehension. After the train wrecks, you're forced to navigate your way through more dilapidated portions of the facility, or portions of the facility that have likely been repurposed into fulfilling more industrial purposes. Honest to God, Gordon does some downright mentally ill shit in this portion of the game. Like, going from diving straight into what is obviously rust water and slaughtering a beast that is obviously not from Earth just to get his hands on a crossbow, or hopping between these enormous hydraulic presses, and don't get me wrong, Gordon does some nasty ass shit in the next chapter too. Like, the player straight up swims in sewage on multiple occasions, which that's honestly a solid explanation as to why the guards constantly comment on Gordon's smell. Okay, while I was trying to source a clip of a guard commenting on the smells, I learned that Half-Life has a coded smell system, and corpses have like their own scent, which can go as far to attract bull squids. It's really cool. If you want to know more, check out this video by this guy. I cannot pronounce that. Sidebar. Speaking of the crossbow, it's exactly what it sounds like, except it shoots tranquilizer darts. It one-shots most enemies or two-shots big ones. It offers a zoom as well before you shoot it. It's pretty fun, and since it allows you to hold so much ammo, it's pretty good to use in tense scenarios because you typically have enough ammo to get you out. I won't lie, I forgot to record this part until I was almost done, so my description of the crossbow is a little bit lax. Just know that it's goated. Okay, back on topic. After finding their way out of the shitwater they were in, the player meets face-to-face with a guard who tells them this.
Freeman, right? I've got a message for you. Make sure you don't...
Before being shot in the back of the head. More fantastic news, the government is trying to assassinate you. The assassins themselves are not a common enemy you run into. I think you only see them twice. I personally don't have a huge problem with these enemies, since I hit my shots with their revolver, which, since the assassins have such low health, it just kind of obliterates them. They don't do much damage, more of a poke, if anything, from their suppressed pistols, but the point is they're effectively trying to keep you from progressing further into the Lambda complex. They don't succeed. I also forgot to mention that before meeting face-to-face with the guard, the player might begin to notice, at least I did, that the Vortigaunts were teleporting onto me in a very malicious pattern. I think the main takeaway from that is that they were teleported there very much on purpose, but the player doesn't get much time to think about that considering the assassins come about so quickly. But anyway, shortly after continuing forward, the player is stupid, is what I'll say. They get ambushed and kidnapped by soldiers.
Side for questioning. What the hell for? We got him. Let's kill him now. And if they find the body? Body? What body?
After those morons of soldiers fail to kill you, they toss you in a trash compactor with your trusty crowbar left to save you. I consider residue processing, the chapter that we're in right now, the halfway point in the game. They rid you of all your ammo and weapons, though they give you back like all of them, but also in the ensuing chapters you get some crazy style weapons very quickly as well. Not much really happens in residue processing other than some really fun platforming. Like I said, the player straight up swims through shit. But after they finish the chapter, the player finds themselves surfacing in a pen of hound eyes. Okay, now for real, I want to do these next few chapters the justice they deserve. This is where I felt tensions really started to rise in the game, especially since you're getting really close to the Lambda complex. As the player climbs their way out of a grate in the floor, they find this guy. Now, we've never seen this enemy before at this point in the game. Obviously, he's not from Earth, but they do start to come up a bit more in this chapter. It's the alien grunt, a large, fairly armored, and obviously more militaristic unit than the Vortigons. It's not clear whether or not this specific grunt was teleported into this little container, or if he's been in there for a lot longer, but as you continue, the implications are not fantastic. Questionable ethics as a chapter starts to imply more about Black Mesa as a whole than just a surface-level science company. There's a reason the military has ties, and there's a reason the military knew there would be monsters there. The same way there's a reason they had a bunch of hound eyes and dog crates. Black Mesa has known about these aliens since long before the Resonance Cascade. How long, we don't know, but this is the start of Black Mesa's scummier pursuits. All that matters is that they've known about and been testing on the things that have been ravaging your life. The question is, though, what else do they know that you don't? Your next course of action after this is to find your way to the Lambda complex, not underground but on the surface, and the player has to fight through hell or high water to get there, facing the brunt of the military's forces, and with the later implications, God knows what else, but you've come this far, and chances are luck is on your side. Given that these labs are on the surface, the military has a fairly notable presence here, but despite being so close, the forces inside still struggle a bit with the alien creatures. In questionable ethics, aside from introducing considerable lore and the alien grunt, they also give you two new weapons, the Snark and, the Tau Cannon. Oh, the Tau Cannon. The Snark is adorable, don't get me wrong, but I fucking hate these things. I literally never use them, and when I do, they bite my toes like the little shits they are. Better yet, in some of my lost footage, I spent 20 minutes trying to fight my way through a vent that they kept killing me in. And they kept killing me from full health. That shit actually pissed me off so much, dude. Oh my... Objectively, they're pretty fun. You just have to be careful about how many you throw, otherwise they'll be a pain in the ass to get rid of, because they do fight back and they do deal damage to you. Now, the Tau Cannon. Man, I love this thing. There is nothing I love more than this thing, except for one weapon that they introduce later in the game, but even then, I don't know. I really like the Tau Cannon. The best part about it is that they introduce it by having a guard test it out and blow himself up. If I learned anything from that interaction, it's that the gun I just picked up didn't have a fucking safety on it, and that was really exciting. The Tau Cannon itself has two firing modes, an automatic yet semi-slow firing mode that's good for using it to deal with smaller guys, and then my lord and savior, the Charge Up. The Charge Up is so goddamn powerful that it works as a rocket launcher replacement. This shit shoots down helicopters, bro. Aside from the lore and the weapons and the saving or killing some Black Mesa members, from here on out your objective is very clear. You have to fight your way across the surface through the military's forces to get to the Lambda complex. Within the first few minutes on your feet, however, it's proven that isn't going to be so easy. They've got snipers, turrets, tanks, ATVs, helicopters, bro, they have everything. They even have fucking fighter jets. What are you supposed to do? But seriously, at first, it's painted like the surface is the military's ground. But as you progress your way further, using the military's own assets against them, you start to realize it kinda isn't. It's a progressive thing throughout the chapter. At first, as you break out of the laboratory, it feels like there's nothing but military. But slowly, it starts to feel less and less like a takeover and more like a war, as the alien forces begin to overwhelm the military surprisingly quickly. And since I'm almost done talking about surface tension, which is the name of this chapter, I'll also go ahead and talk about the weapons they give you here, which is only two, but damn are they fun. They give you this creature that you stick your hand in. Now, a little callback, a short bit ago I spoke about the alien grunt, but I didn't finish talking about it, because I wanted to save talking about the gun for when you get your hands on it. It has an infinite ammo pool that regenerates fairly slowly, but more importantly, there's no reload. If you have a bullet, you have a bullet. The primary fire is slower, but it homes in on enemies, while the secondary fire bursts quickly, but it doesn't home in. This isn't a weapon you often see people using or talking about, especially since it didn't feature in later games, but I actually quite liked using it, especially if I had to deal with individual soldiers or enemies around corners, though the homing is far from perfect and it's certainly janky. The other weapon they give you is the rocket launcher, which is a fairly common weapon in video games. I like it especially in the Half-Life series though, especially in the first game. The rocket launcher can either be fired normally or so that it'll home in where you point it. It's not a complex thing, but it makes the rocket launcher really fun, having the option to choose how you use it, even if the options aren't actually all that different. Towards the end of Surface Tension, as you close in on the Lambda Lab, you run into another Gargantua, completely ravaging whatever military forces are left in the wake of the invasion. You're forced to run from it, where you come across a dead soldier and a targeting system for mortars. Here is where you're shown the reality that the aliens are now far too much for the soldiers to fight against.
Come in, Cooper. Do you copy? Forget about Freeman. We're abandoning the base.
Whether or not there's enough soldiers or the alien forces are more concentrated, the incident has now turned into war and the HECU is losing, and now they're pulling out. After using the mortar system to bomb the hell out of the Gargantua, the player then works their way closer and closer down to the Lambda core. From here you need to fight your way through a few HECU soldiers hiding in the labs for safety, but that's about the last of the military you actually see in its entirety. From here on out, the fight is between you and the aliens, and you both know that considering the fact that they're teleporting many of the aliens directly in your path in their attempts to stop you. But shortly after finding your way into the Lambda labs, a scientist informs you of this. The laboratories themselves are for teleportation experimentation, though you aren't supposed to know that. Not that it matters anymore. What does matter is that the alien invasion would have stopped ages ago, but one obscenely powerful being is keeping the connection open by itself. For what reason, nobody knows, but the invasion continues due to that creature. Your job now is to flood the Lambda reactors so that you may travel through them to find your way to the rest of the Lambda team, where you can use their technology to teleport yourself in, fight the powerful creature in question, and then end everything once and for all. You, the player, started the Black Mesa incident, and now your goal is to finish it. But as per usual, it isn't that simple. Similar to specific encounters in past and rising encounters in recent, no longer are the alien creatures happenstance obstacles in your path. Right now, they're being teleported directly onto you with the intent of stopping specifically you. The aliens know that right now you are their biggest threat. At the opening of the Lambda Core chapter, they actually also give you the last weapon in the game that you get your hands on. This utter beast of a weapon called the gluon gun was crafted by a very depressing scientist who didn't have the balls to shoot it himself. After that, an interesting comment about me and my violent tendencies, I was inclined to test it out, and yeah. The gluon gun kind of always reminded me of the Ghostbusters proton pack, but I feel like that's because the gluon gun itself has a backpack to go along with it. Earlier when I mentioned that there was only one gun that contended for my favorite in the entire game against the Tau Cannon, this was it. I still think I like the Tau Cannon more due to the fact that it's just so versatile, but the gluon gun is still certainly a big contender. It just, it vaporizes like everything. I have not found a single enemy that doesn't get turned into mist by this weapon, save for like boss fights. It's just, it's so glorious, dude. I love this weapon so much. Okay, anyways, from here on out, you have to fight. And with your newfound weaponry, it's more like massacre your way through the Lambda reactor, enable it, and then navigate your way through various portals until you're at the last stop before you, a human, invade the alien homeworld. It's also important to note that as you gear up, the last lore drop you receive from the Lambda Labs is more confirmation that Black Mesa has been dipping their nuts in alien fondue for much longer than the Resonance Cascade. Considering the Lambda Labs specialize in teleportation, it makes sense that this would be the lab to send people out if they knew of the alien homeworld. There have been teams, plenty of them in fact, that were sent out to the alien homeworld to investigate their surroundings and bring stuff back, though after a while they stopped returning home. This is where the aliens in captivity and questionable ethics came from, and this is where your sample came from. It was all one big pile of shit bad luck, and you happen to be the unlucky person to step both of your feet in it. Before they send you out, they give you the long jump module, which you have to crouch before you jump, and it makes you jump really fast. I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. Point is, they gear your ass up, and when they send you out, you have to wait for a scientist to activate the teleportation machine, and you have to defend him. Maybe, like many of the expeditions before you, there was no way out of the alien homeworld. Maybe you would die at the end of this trek, either alone or at the hands of whatever powerful creature is keeping that connection alive between your world and theirs, but when that portal is ready, there's no other option at hand than to just dive straight in. Now, Zen consists of 4 chapters as a whole, but the segment is relatively short when compared to the rest of the game. From what I understand, Zen was actually an incredibly rushed and unplanned part of Half-Life when it was in development. I think that when propped up with the rest of the storyline, it fits, and it's not necessarily a bad part of the game, but I would be lying if I said I liked it. Part of the reason I disliked it is because it felt very confusing at times, though maybe it was so that it would feel alien in that regard, but also there were parts that were simply just obscenely annoying to get through. Part of what made Zen as a whole so miserable to me was the low gravity. One of the things I've always loved about Half-Life in the Source games is their movement. Coming from someone who plays Counter-Strike and Team Fortress from time to time, I dabble in movement when I can. But jumping on Zen is like a death sentence. In a game where I believe the most powerful tool at your disposal is your speed, taking 9 years to fall is like standing up in front of a trench in no man's land. It just felt like Zen could have been so much more. I'll talk about more of that as a whole when I conclude this, but I'll quit yapping for now and finish up the plot. As the player comes to in the alien homeworld, titled Zen, they see this before them. Immediately, proof of past expeditions lay before you, with evidence that the HEV suit won't guarantee your survival as the first corpse you see wears it. You're forced to, similar to the last chapter, navigate Zen through series of portals that will take you through separate parts of the border world. First, you're only exposed to a minor part of the ecosystem, where everything, even the ground below you, gives off the impression that it's alive. There are pools of healing water that hound eyes drink from, and barnacles can be seen nesting above them to catch unlucky, hungry prey. You get so used to seeing the Zen creatures posted up in Black Mesa that it's almost hard to remember that they actually come from a world where they belong. But shortly after entering the first teleporter, the player realizes yet again it's never so simple. This is the Gonarch. It's implied to be effectively the queen of the headcrabs, with a large testicle that spurts out juvenile headcrabs or this stuff to attack you. Unfortunately, this creature is in your path, and you have to fight it to get past. Now, compared to all the boss fights yet, I like this one the most. You have all the gear at your disposal, and so long as you're able to dodge its attacks, you feel like an unstoppable force fighting this thing. It'll run and trail you through portions of Zen before finally getting caught in a hole where you're forced to fight at close quarters, and after felling the creature, it pops, revealing a portal under the ground that you can take, which leads you to a few more portions of Zen, where you can see more creatures than their natural habitat. I'd actually like to also note something specific and cool. In this portion with the Gargantua and a bunch of alien grunts, I killed an alien grunt before moving forward, which set off an alarm. I thought it was pretty cool foreshadowing for what they reveal next. The last location in Zen they have you venture through is a bit weird to navigate at first. In fact, it actually stays a bit confusing, but my point remains. This is where the player learns how Zen was able to combat the US military in the invasion of Black Mesa, because not only are Vortigaunts enslaved, but besides being sent in to invade Black Mesa, they're also being used to operate the assembly lines for these large barrels. It's not obvious to the player what they are until they break one, in which an alien grunt will break out of the barrel itself, as compared to the US military, who in that instance of the war only has limited resources that can be dispatched in a short amount of time. Zen has an infinite amount of soldiers to be manufactured at their disposal, and to be teleported out to Earth, which is all the more reason for you to hurry up. Your last stop before the final fight is the portal that's being kept open by the powerful creature that you're about to face. You hear the voices of your coworkers coming from the other side before you take your final step. The Nihilith is interesting. It really is a boss fight, because it deals heavy damage and uses its powers and environment to its advantage, being healed by the crystals on the wall, and oftentimes trying to teleport you away to different portions of Zen, though you find your way back more often than not. Once the crystals are broken and you use your inhumanly powerful arsenal, the Nihilith's power significantly decreases from what it was before. From there, its head splits open, and the player can get above it, shoot down into its head, and break the crystal in its skull. As the Nihilith begins to die, it floats up towards the roof of the arena and
Gordon Freeman in the flesh. Or rather, in the hazard suit. I took the liberty of relieving you of your weapons. Most of them were government property. As for the suit, I think you've earned it.
This is the G-Man. He interrupts your likely death, informing you of many things that simply just don't make sense, but imply more was going on than you could ever hope to understand. Turns out, there was no such thing as good or bad luck. No, there was only him. It's hard to catch him if you weren't looking, but many times throughout the game he's been watching you, either barely out of sight or significantly out of reach, but just close enough to keep an eye on what you're doing. He tells you that after killing the Nihilith, the border world you previously fought through is now under the control of his employers. Who they are nobody knows, but they're now at least revealed to you. He then proposes an offer to you. Then you find yourself where you were all the way back at the start of this entire ordeal, in the Black Mesa transit system, where if you went back and looked, even then he was watching you. His offer is to step into his portal and accept his deal, though you have no clue what your new job might be. But if you refuse, he'll send you into a fight you have no chance of winning. It's time to choose, and this is no more than the illusion of choice. So you step in.
Wisely done, Mr. Freeman. I will see you up ahead.
Now, let's talk about all that. I've got a few things I want to say, and as I write this, I'm not exactly sure where to start, so let's start where I think I had the most fun. I loved the movement, and even though it isn't fully the Source engine, the movement feels almost exactly the same, but there's zero limits. To do high-speed B-hopping in the second game, you need to do backwards B-hopping, due to them putting a cap on forward acceleration but not backwards. In this one, you can go as fast as you want, when you want, and I love it. In the past few years, I've really gotten into movement in Source games, dabbling in B-hopping in CS when I can actually manage to land one, but more than that, rocket jumping in TF2, so the niches of the Half-Life movement system came relatively naturally to me. It was extremely enjoyable. Another thing I'd like to talk about in the conclusion is to talk about some of the differences between Half-Life and Crowbar Collective's remake, Black Mesa, but I'd like to also be kind of careful about it. Now that I've played both, I can say my honest opinion, which I'll stand by. I think that if you're entering the Half-Life franchise and you want to start somewhere, you should considering playing Black Mesa instead of I liked playing Half-Life more than I liked playing Black Mesa, but they both have their strengths. One of the reasons that I think Black Mesa is a better opening experience is because it's significantly closer graphically to where the rest of the series is at when you move on to the next games. Not to mention, I think the adaptation of the art direction and level design isn't just faithful, I think in many cases it's way better. When I played Zen on Black Mesa for the first time, my mind was blown the moment I stepped out of the cave. The soundtrack, the skybox, the show they put on display really makes you feel like you're in an alien world. It feels like it has ecosystems that have nothing to do with you, and that really blew my mind, whereas Zen in Half-Life is... I think as a whole, a lot of the levels in Zen are improved in Black Mesa as well, but I want to put a cork in that before I continue. One thing I think is really important to say is that I will probably never play Black Mesa again. Black Mesa is about 15 hours in length roughly, and Zen is 4 of those hours. However, with Half-Life, it took me like 9. Only about 1 of those hours being Zen. I don't mean to say that the length difference is objectively good or bad for either. In Black Mesa, Zen feels like an actual part of the game as compared to Half-Life, where it feels a lot more like a means to an end. For example, I'll talk about the Interloper chapter. In Black Mesa, the story points they meant to convey in that chapter, Vortigaunt slavery, production of Zen grunts, it's conveyed infinitely better in Black Mesa than it is in Half-Life. But at the same time, in Black Mesa, the Interloper chapter is about 2 hours long, whereas in Half-Life it's roughly 15 minutes. And while that extending of the source material was good in a lot of cases, in certain parts of the game it just pisses me off even thinking about replaying those sections. The tentacle boss fight and on a rail genuinely just piss me off to think about from Black Mesa, but in Half-Life 1 they're just so much shorter and it's significantly more tolerable. It's more fun, to be honest with you. Again, as an entry to the series, I think that Black Mesa might be the better choice just because it's more recent, but at the same time I think that Half-Life is a significantly better game, especially for how replayable it is. But enough talking about comparing it with Black Mesa. I know that was a lot. I just felt like it was important to bring up, considering I did play Black Mesa before I played the original game. And while I'm taking the chance to talk about this kind of stuff, I also do want to mention the soundtrack in Half-Life 1 is really, really good. They're simple and the songs aren't actually that crazy, but certain tracks like Klaxon Beat and the end credits theme are just, man, they are so fun to listen to. And generally speaking, I feel like that's a metric that you can apply to the whole game. Half-Life is just fun, like incredibly fun. Don't get me wrong, certain parts felt extremely unfair or infuriating or whatever, but aside from novelty or nostalgia, I think that Half-Life is an intuitive and incredible game. It's hard to describe, but it just feels so responsive. It was no doubt revolutionary for video games as a whole, and you can tell because even though it is incredibly dated, it feels like it's modern. It's a similar thing as when I booted up Half-Life 2 for the first time in 2020 and got blown away by the facial expressions. There are just certain things that cement this game as one of the cornerstones of gaming as a whole. And thank you, whichever of you who decided to watch this far. I know this video was a bit of a drag. I won't be as rude to people who skipped to the end this time, but I still think you're quite the bitch if you did. If you enjoyed this video, it would be pretty sweet if you subscribed. It boosts my ego, but don't expect another video in a month. I am a lazy, procrastinating asshole who's acting like college is too much to handle when I realistically have all the free time in the world. And, you know, I understand that there are thousands of videos like this out there. If you look up anything about the game, chances are you'll see something positive, but I feel like that's for a reason. Even though I didn't grow up on it, and I wasn't even born before Half-Life 2 released, I still felt like I wanted to pay homage to the series by making at least something about it. It's not my childhood, but that doesn't mean it's beyond me. I fully believe that Half-Life will forever be regarded as one of the most important games in video game history. But funny enough as it is, the game that dethroned it was its sequel. However, we will talk about that at another time. For now, I will see you up ahead.